Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome to the Common Law Code of Wales meeting. We meet here every 2 weeks on a Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Nice to see so many people. The agenda for tonight is, our first guest is Peter Croll, who's going to come up and explain a bit how we're being defrauded. I think Peter's sticking with parking tickets tonight. We've all had one, but we don't have to pay them. After Peter, Stella from the Forester Dean Common Law Code will be coming up. Then we'll have a 10-15 minute break and then let loose the dogs of war. The one and only Guy Taylor will be up. So it's going to be a good evening. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll start the meeting. If I can introduce you to Peter Croll. Here we go.
Evening everybody. As you probably gathered, I'm not a fan of local councils. I'm particularly not a fan of being defrauded out of any money or any other aspect of what they steal from us. So is that okay? Yeah. So what I wanted to do, I recently got a notice from the bailiff over an unpaid parking ticket. So whenever something like that happens, I tend to start getting a bit forensic and finding out what it is that they're actually trying to do. And as you can imagine, there is massive fraud in the whole structure of the way that the bailiffs operate. But even before that, there's actually fraud written into the regulations and the laws that the councils are using to impose and enforce the tickets anyway. So I just thought, at risk of boring everybody, I'd just introduce a few legal terms that I've discovered that demonstrate how they actually write fraud into the whole of their writing. And I just want to introduce two little words. I first came across them in the Extradition Act of 2003, because we were trying to figure out how it is that they can extradite people without having to show a prima facie case against them. So I looked through the Extradition Act and I couldn't find the bit that said it. And I finished up phoning up the Ministry of Justice and they told me which section it's in. It's in section 71, the Extradition Act 2003. I think we can thank Jack Straw for this, I believe. And so I just want to introduce you to what it actually says. And so in section 71, subsection 3, it gives a situation where they need evidence for the judge to be convinced to issue an arrest warrant for somebody that a foreign country wants to extradite. But then, when you go down to subsection 4, and this is the bit, you need to concentrate on what this says. And it says, but if the Category 2 territory, like America or whatever it is, to which extradition is requested, is designated for the purposes of this section by order made by the Secretary of State, subsections 2 and 3 have effect as if evidence read information. And that's actually the way they sneaked it in. And to find that, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. What they've actually done is that they've said that instead of having evidence, information is enough. So the country that's requesting extradition doesn't have to provide a prima facie case against the person. All they need to do is to provide information. So the words are, subsections 2 and 3 have effect as if evidence read information. As if. But of course we all know information isn't evidence, it's just information. So all that the state has to do is say, oh, we think that somebody's doing something, without having to provide evidence. So it's the words as if, and you'll find the words as if all over legislation. It's everywhere. And so when we go straight into parking tickets, that Extradition Act is just an example of what they do. So with parking tickets, Road Traffic Act 1991, section 78, enforcement. In this section, etc., a Part 2 debt means any sum which is payable under or by virtue of any provision of this part of this Act, and recoverable as if it were payable under a county court order. So that is the Road Traffic Act 1991, and it is that provision that makes everything that they do possible. Because They're saying that the money is recoverable as if it were payable under a county court order. But of course what we already know is that the Traffic Enforcement Centre in Northampton, which they keep on claiming is a county court, is nothing of the sort. It's an office full of administrators who are rubber stamping requests by the council that they can enforce a debt against us purely on the say-so of a clerk. And there is no judge inside St Catherine's House in Northampton. So what they're doing is, they're saying that they can enforce a debt against us, which goes right through to having bailiffs come round, as if a county court, as if it were payable under a county court order. But there is no county court order. So what the legislators have done is they've created a situation where the council and the company that runs the Traffic Enforcement Centre, whoever that company is, have complete carte blanche for the council to say, we think he owes us the money, and without a court having made you a proper debtor, they're saying that they can send bailiffs round to your house. So that is actually written right into the legislation before they even start. So they obviously think they can do anything. Because, as I understand it, proper due process means that we have to have an application against us made in the county court to have a judge to make us a judgment debtor before they can do anything. So then when you start to look at all of the other paperwork that follows through, none of it has got any county court judgment number on it. It may have numbers that come from the Traffic Enforcement Centre, but that isn't a court. So every single part of the process is complete and absolute fraud, and all of the documents that they issue are completely fraudulent too. They actually sent me a warrant because I started to question this process with the council. It was a Shropshire County Council, so in Shrewsbury. And I started asking them questions, and bless her cotton socks, the lady on the other end of the phone really didn't know anything about it. She just processes documents. But these people are really interesting. I thoroughly encourage everybody to phone them up with a recorder and talk to them, because the less they know, the more they spill the beans. And she told me quite a lot about how they operate their system. But there are other things in the regulations, because after the 1991 Road Traffic Act came in, then they issued Road Traffic Enforcement Regulations of 1993, in which it actually says that the Traffic Enforcement Centre is allowed to authorise the council to issue a warrant. But councils can't issue warrants, only courts can issue warrants. And in order to get the court to issue a warrant, you have to fill in a request form. And unfortunately for them, the request form requires a county court judgment number in the top right-hand corner. I've actually got copies of most of these documents here. So if they were even to go to the extent of spending money for every single unpaid parking ticket, which would be thousands and thousands, I think TEC does about 1,000 a week, they would actually have to make an application to either a county court or a magistrate's court with a county court judgment number, which they haven't got, in order to get the court to issue a warrant. So the warrants that the council send to the bailiffs to print out through an email are all fraudulent as well, because there is no county court judgment, and there's no order that emanates through the proper legal system, the court system, even if the county court was lawful, which I'm sure guys can say a bit about later. Even if they were to do it properly, they wouldn't be able to do it. They would make no money, because it would take huge amounts of time. And so what they've actually done is they've legislated and written statutory instruments on the back of the legislation, which basically means that the creditor, in this case the council, the corporation, which is the council, are allowed to slap a demand for money on your windscreen, then go through a process through an office which is not a court, and all of the time writing in their documents that people doing it are court officers, which they're not. They can't be because it's not a court. And then they claim the right to send bailiffs around your house or clamp your car or crush your car, do whatever it is that they want to do. And all of it is just on their say-so. There's been no due process at all. Even in a corrupt legal system, there has been no due process. It's all, we say you owe the money, therefore we can come round your house and steal your goods or con you into paying money. And then when you start getting forensic about all of the documents that the bailiffs send out, they're making claims which are false as well on their documents. And it's just absolutely amazing, because if you go through their rules, it kind of looks as though it's okay, but actually it's not. Because the legislation says it can all be done as if a county court had made a judgment, which they have not made. Very interesting. And then talking about the Traffic Enforcement Centre in Northampton, I recently got a claim form from a private parking company who have issued a claim form from the Northampton Bulk Handling Centre, which is doing virtually the same thing. But at least in that instance, there is an option to put it into the court and make an argument with the judge. So actually, strangely enough, the private parkers are acting closer to proper legal process than the councils are. This is very, very interesting. Maybe it's because they've got to do it. I really don't know why they're making it harder for them than they are for the councils. Maybe the councils know why. I don't know if there's really very, very much more I want to say. I've actually got copies here of some of the fraudulent documents, but I've also got some templates printed out from the Westlaw website of what some of these things are supposed to look like, if they actually were to do it properly. But of course, I think we all know that they couldn't possibly afford to go through proper due legal process for every parking ticket, for every council tax arrears case. They just couldn't afford to do it. So what's been constructed legally in their language is a system whereby they can steal huge amounts of money from us, scare us to death in the process, and they do it, and it costs them virtually nothing. In fact, they make money out of the council tax ones because they put these huge amounts of costs on. And what we calculated, they make when I did a council tax case in Wales, in where I live in Wales, up in mid Wales, I think there was 730 odd cases that time, and all of them were 50 quid each. 85, yeah.
They charged me 320 the other week.
Right. Yeah. So they actually make money out of breaking the law.
Court charges, and I didn't even go to court.
Right. Right. So I'm in the process now. I was very fortunate the other day. I struggled and I found a phone number in the Ministry of Justice, and I've been talking to a woman who's actually gonna give me what they think the proper rules are regarding the whole business of whether the councils are actually required to issue proper warrants. So I'm not sure that she's going to find it easy to answer the questions I'm asking, because actually in the rules, I almost forgot, in the rules it actually says that the council may issue a writ of fury facius, which is a proper writ. So they've written the rules that the council have to issue a proper writ, but they've found a way around it so that they don't have to. And if you read through all the traffic enforcement incentive rules and all of the council rules and all of the statutory instruments and all the legislation, it's quite obvious that they've set up a system which is kind of looks as though it's right, but when you start fishing out the details, it's actually not right, and they're using a fraudulent system within which they are also breaking rules as well. It's a bit too complicated to explain the details, but that's actually what they're doing. Yeah, absolute smoke and mirrors. And at the end of the day, they're sending thugs around their houses, trying to scare us to death and forcing us to pay money. Oh, and incidentally, In the thing that masquerades as an order from the Traffic Enforcement Centre, it doesn't mention a single word about bailiff costs. All it says is that they can charge costs, but it doesn't say a money amount, which means that the court, if it were a court, has not ordered that you owe the money to the bailiffs. So it would be very nice if everybody started saying to the bailiffs, well look, I might settle with you for the actual original debt, but I'm not going to give you any costs because the court order didn't say that I had to. So that's a very interesting one as well. But they try to make it look as though you actually do owe the money. They make it look as though the penalty has been escalated, when in fact it hasn't. It's just its original amount of money. So in my instance, with the council's calculation, is that for this one parking ticket I owe them £110, but the bailiffs have escalated it up to about £450. But all of the rest of that's their costs, which the Traffic Enforcement Centre didn't issue an order that they should get. It's just that the regulations say that they can charge up to a certain amount. But it's a private arrangement between you and them, just like it's a private arrangement between you and the council for their part of what they're claiming. So the whole thing it's just complete and absolute fraud from the first letter right through to wherever it goes.
Withdraw consent.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my number one rule is that they're not getting any money. It doesn't matter what happens, they're not getting any money. And if I can pull them down, I will.
Hey!
So I think that's about it. Yeah. Thanks for listening. I hope it was interesting. And the laws that the councils are using to impose and enforce the tickets anyway. So I just thought, at risk of boring everybody, I just introduce a few legal terms that I've discovered that demonstrate how they actually write fraud into the whole of their writing. And I just want to introduce two little words. I first came across them in the Extradition Act of 2003, because we were trying to figure out how it is that they can extradite people without having to show a prima facie case against them. So I looked through the Extradition Act and I couldn't find the bit that said it. And I finished up phoning up the Ministry of Justice and they told me which section it's in. It's in section 71, the Extradition Act 2003. I think we can thank Jack Straw for this, I believe. And so I just want to introduce you to what it actually says. And so in section, another aspect of what they steal from us. So is that okay? Yeah. So what I wanted to do, I recently got a notice from the bailiff over an unpaid parking ticket. So whenever something like that happens, I tend to start getting a bit forensic and finding out what it is that they're actually trying to do. And as you can imagine, there is massive fraud in the whole structure of the way that the bailiffs operate. But even before that, there's actually fraud written into the regulation.
15-minute break, and then let loose the dogs of war. The one and only Guy Taylor will be up. So it's going to be a good evening. Thanks everybody for coming. And we'll start the meeting. If I can introduce you to Peter Croll. Here we go.
Evening everybody. As you probably gathered, I'm not a fan of local councils. I'm particularly not a fan of being defrauded out of any money or any.
Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome to the Common Law Code of Wales meeting. We meet here every 2 weeks on a Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Nice to see so many people. The agenda for tonight is, our first guest is Peter Croll, who's going to come up and explain a bit how we're being defrauded. I think Peter's sticking with parking tickets tonight. We've all had one, but we don't have to pay them. After Peter, Stella from the Forest of Dean Common Law Code will be coming up. Then we'll have a 10